Okay, let us begin. The what do we got here? September what are we? The 30th? Is that today? Yes. Right before Rosh Hashanah. And of course, our thoughts are we'll see more when we get off. And later this morning, it seems like the first movements into Lebanon is begun. So of course, we pray now especially for the safety of all the soldiers, the greatest army. We've seen what they could do the last couple of weeks, but we know that there's always injuries and casualties when you have close fighting like that. And my cousin's son is on the front lines, who's brought back from America for this very purpose. So we especially are concerned about him as well. Okay, a few things as always. What I'm going to tell you now is really not, it's not Nogea, as we say, to what we're doing now, but I've had it for a number of weeks. So I figure I'll mention it to you because it relates to things in previous semesters. And I've been holding on to it now, not weeks, actually, months and months. I've had this on my table. So just because I think it's interesting and I always like to point out when we see that in the Sfarim, traditional Sfarim, they say the sort of things that the academic scholars say and the sort of things that the rabbis, some of the rabbis tell you you're not supposed to say. It's not true. Of course, if you read other rabbis like Chaim Soloveitchik, although he's a professor, he used to be a rabbi, a Rosh Yeshiva at YU, he says exactly this. But there's a sefer, not a famous sefer. It's let me show you it for a second. It's called here you can see it's called Lechem Mishnah by this Moshe ben Noach Yitzhak Lifshitz. It's a very old sefer, as you can see, going back to the 17th century. It's a commentary on Mishnah. So nothing really that significant except that there's a new edition. And if you look in the new edition on Avos, Pirkei Avos, chapter 5, page 135, this is what he says. And I just thought this was interesting. He talks about how poskim, he's comparing it to Hillel and Shammai, that whether they're, well, let me read you what he says about Hillel and Shammai, and then he applies it. He says that the neshamos are chalukos, that people's neshamos, I would say people's inclinations differ. Yesh mitzad din v'yesh mitzad chesed. Some are, like to use the Kabbalistic, I guess, term, are from din, justice, and some are chesed. And then he says, "V'hu inyan Shammai v'Hillel, ki Shammai haya kaftan." Shammai was a very exacting person. L'fi shoresh nishmaso v'lakach haya b'chol makom chumra. Shammai's uh, inclinations internally, his personality led him to be machmir v'Hillel anvas nusno mitzad shorish nishmaso mitzad arachamim. And he would always be lakula, and he elaborates on this, and that's he says if your shorish nishmaso is for din, no tela olam chumra l'isser l'tuma l'chiyuv. And the people whose soros nishmaso is the other direction, they go lahatir, lataher, lazakai, like Hillel and Shammai. So here we see a traditional sefer pointing out something which I think everyone knows, but in the sometimes in the polemics or the dogmatic statements of orthodoxy, they tell you to deny your lying eyes. You know what you see. Then obviously some poskim inclined to chumrah, some inclined to kula, and so we see that already there. Um, Bitzala, you raised a couple of questions, 2 points, one on the Kuzari principle, which I want to answer it properly, in my opinion. So I'm going to wait till next class, God willing, because I need a safer, which I don't have, or a book, which I don't have. But let me answer your other question. I mentioned last class that even in Brisk, the not Brisk today in Jerusalem, as far as I know, they don't have a Mussar Seder, but maybe they do. But like I said, in Brisk, the yeshiva in Brisk, they, even though Reb Chaim, when he was in Volozhin, was opposed to the Mussar Seder and the Mashgiach and all that Mussar, they appointed a Mussar Mashgiach there. And you say, I'll read, quote, I think that when you spoke of Brisk having succumbed to Mussar, you were conflating two Brisks. The yeshiva in Brisk under Rav Moshe Sokolovsky was, to the best of my knowledge, not under the guidance of the Soloveitchik family. The anti-Mussar Brisk yeshiva that we know of today did not function as a yeshiva in an organized fashion and whatever. Chaim Ravelvo immediately had informal circles of individuals learning under them. So I have to say, Betzalel, that b'mechilas kvodecha, you're mistaken. The yeshiva in Brisk called Toras Chesed was absolutely under the Soloveitchik control, and in fact, even more than that. But if you want to see it, well, let's just we can open up here to the on Wikipedia, and the information here comes out of the book Harav Mi Brisk. By the way, if you look in the book Harav Mi Brisk, I have it here, the pages. If you look on page 242, it tells us that the four children of Revelvo learned for years in Yeshivas Toras Chesed. And then it explains on page 243 about this yeshiva, and that's the information you get here on Wikipedia. It says that the yeshiva was established before World War One. In its early years, the students were gathering around the base medrash Mishmar in the city, and they learned together. After Reb Chaim was appointed as the Rav of the city, he appointed his Reb Simcha Zelig Rieger as Rosh Yeshiva, in addition to being Dayan, and later Rav Moshe Sokolovsky was appointed. And so that's what it tells you here, that Reb Chaim appointed it, and it clearly was under his guidance. And later on it says that after Rav Sokolovsky died, the Rav Soloveitchik, Rav Elva, wanted to bring Rav Shachan. But I'm going to give you something now which does not appear in the book Harav Mi Brisk, a letter from the Brisker Rav that, as far as I know, is completely unknown and gives us information even more than this. So let me show you this letter. The letter I'm going to show you is to Rabbi Yehuda Landau. He was the chief rabbi of South Africa. If we have some people from South Africa, well, actually, no, he died. He died earlier. He died, I think, in the early 40s or something. We can check it. But this is what I want to show you. Actually, why do I need to guess here? I'm going to, while you see one screen, I'm going to tell you what year Rabbi Judah Leib landed. Yeah, 42. He also was a playwright. But you all can see the screen now. So let me enlarge it a little here if I can here. This is a letter from the Brisker Rav, signed on the letterhead, by the way, of Yeshivas Toras Chesed, to Rabbi Lando, Rav HaKolel b'Medinat Africa, about a Mashuach they sent. And listen to what he says in the middle of this letter. And this information is not found anywhere. He talks about second paragraph. He talks about Yeshiva Seinu, HaKadosha, namely Toras Chesed, is Yeshiva Chashuva Mefora Achas Yeshiva Sagadolos B'Medinas Poland, one of the biggest yeshivas in Poland. Nosta Me'az Livnei Shloshim Shana. It was established between 30 years ago. This is 1931, so 1901. Al Yadei Adoni Avi Mori V'Rabi Hagaon Achased Rabban Shel Yisrael. So he's saying that the yeshiva was itself established by my father. So here we have Edut Ne'emana, testimony from Revelvo, that the yeshiva Toras Chesed Yeshiva, here you see it, was established by Reb Chaim Brisker. Now, is that in contradiction to what it says in Harav Mi Brisk? That Harav Mi Brisk describes it as like people were studying in the base medrash, and then when Reb Chaim came, he appointed Simcha Zelig as Rosh Yeshiva. So it could be in contradiction. It could be that this information is mistaken. And that, of course, there were people studying local Batei Midrash. So when Chaim comes to town, he sets up the yeshiva from those people and says, here we're going to have a yeshiva. Or it could be that it basically continued in the same place, but Revelvo does not regard it as a yeshiva before that. That you had some people in a local base medrash learning, but Reb Chaim comes and he organizes and he appoints it, and now they give it the name Yeshivas Toras Chesed. So however you look at it, the yeshiva begins either from scratch, or just taking this base medrash. But it was Reb Chaim, as Revelvo tells us, who founded the yeshiva. That is, he created it as a functioning yeshiva, not just a place where people learn. This information, as far as I know, is not known anywhere else. And this letter I just showed you from Revelvo, as far as I know, is not known by anyone. I found it when I was in Jerusalem last winter. in one of the archives. I found it there. So, and Betzalel, your other very interesting point, I will get to it next class. A couple other things. So, Moshe from Lakewood, or as you tell me, Moshe from Jackson. So remember I said that Rabbi Greenwald mentioned that these harsh comments of the sages, Rabbi Yehuda, Yekusiel Yehuda Greenwald, Leopold Greenwald of Columbus, that these harsh comments of that about you have to worry about, don't get the rabbis upset because they're like they're going to bite you, that sort of thing. Not the way we think of rabbis. That should be gentle. He said that it's in opposition to the Christian view of you're supposed to turn the other cheek, and we're not supposed to do that. That if they insult you, the rabbis should respond. They're not supposed to be someone you step on. So Moshe points out very interestingly, about this idea that we all know in quotes, that turn the other cheek's a Christian concept. He says, it reminds me, he writes, that my Rebbe, Rav Yitzhak Perelman, told me that when Rav Mendel Kaplan was a Maggid Shir in Philadelphia, he always used to pass by a church on his way to yeshiva. On the front of the church, they would always post a verse from the Bible, and he tried his best for himself to see if he could recognize if it was a Christian verse or it was a Torah Jewish verse. One of the examples he gave to show you that's not always so clear was turn the other cheek, as this is a Christian concept, but this is a mistake. Moshe says, it's Mendel, the Rebbe, either of Mendel Kaplan or of Yitzhak Perman gave the example of turn the other cheek. But Moshe says it's a mistake. It's a verse in Eicha. So, and we read this let me open up my thing here. Here's the pasuk in Eicha, chapter 3. Verse 30. What does it say here? Yiten lamakeu lechi. Yisba b'cherpa. Let him give his cheek to him that smiteth him. Let him be filled with reproach. So what is it here? Have we been mistaken all these years? Is it really a Jewish concept? Of course, there's different ways to how to understand this pasuk. I would, you look at Das Mikra and other sources. I would only, and they say, well, it doesn't really mean that you turn your other cheek and just let them keep hitting you. But Christians generally don't regard it that way. Also, Christians have this notion. I mean, Jesus says this in the Sermon on the Mount. But Christians also have the notion that you can defend yourself. So they have interpretation of this as well. What I can tell you, well, first of all, I looked in this book. The Jewish Annotated New Testament, edited by Marc Bretler and Amy Jill Levine. It's basically a commentary on the New Testament from with Jewish sources. Herb Basser, who listens often to the classes, he also has written a great deal on like a Jewish commentary on the New Testament. But they don't tell me anything. All they do on that verse in the New Testament is cross-reference Eicha. So I don't really have much to say on this, just 2 points. That one of the very first of these classes we did during COVID, the Mir Yeshiva, you might recall I spoke about a rabbi, Rav Aaron Moshe Kiselev, Volozhin student who becomes rabbi in Harbin in China, which has, if you recall, had a very nice Jewish community. It's a chapter, by the way, in Dara Horn's book, Everyone Loves Dead Jews or something. So she originally wrote that about going to the ice festival there, and seeing how Harbin, they turned it into like a memorial for the Jewish community because it's tourism. But he was the chief rabbi of the Far East, and in his Sefer, Imre Schaefer, you can check it out, page 69. He deals with this. He says, so what's the difference between us and the Christians on this matter? He calls it Hapitgam Hayadua, Shabo Mitparim Hanotzrim. That, the Christians take pride in this. If they hit you in the face, give them the other cheek. And he points out that those who went by this approach of turn the other cheek, they're the ones who brought more death in the world upon anyone. And then he says, our Torah, which is a Torah of Mussar, but it's also a Torah of Chaim, a realistic one. He says, we preceded the words of Oto Aish, their Jesus, because in Eicha we have the same thing. But what does he say? He says, but this is who b'derech Mussar leyachidim. But he says that's for like special people, not for the masses. And um, but he says that the Torah for generally made rules, and that okay, so that's is that shot in the pasuk? I don't know, but that's what he says. And finally, this is amazing though. In Midrash Rabbi David Hanagi, who it seems, at least some say he's a descendant of the Rambam. I think he's the 13th century, or I think you have to check. But if you look in his work on Moadim, page 228, he says that he quotes the verse in Eicha, and he says, turn the other cheek, give him the other cheek, is the characteristic of Bnei Adam Hashlemim, that is the perfect people, who are always Nitkaim, Nelavim, Vesavlanim, that is, they take it, they don't respond. Um, and then he says, because the Chazal tell us, Olam, you should always be min hanelavim, and I mean ovim. Always be the ones who they'll insult you, they rebuke you, and you don't respond. Um, and then he says, just like the pasuk says, Yitenu makeu echi, and then it says, he says, V'mikal adam al alechi, and if he hits you on the cheek, Yifshot lo halechi acher, give him the other cheek. So here, Rav David Anagi quotes this very idea, give him your other cheek, without even knowing, apparently, without even knowing this is from the New Testament. This is one of these examples of psukim, verses, like the other one we spoke about was a man is not a prophet in his own town, where people quote it as a Maimer Chazal, when it's not a Maimer Chazal. It's from the New Testament. Okay, let's now get to where we are. Oh, finally, one more thing. Um, with regard to the issue of Rosh Hashanah, which is coming up, how are we supposed to regard it? So someone sent me a piece by Rabbi Daniel Mann about crying on Rosh Hashanah. Basically, it's a machlokas. The Gra says you don't cry. He cites the verse in Nehemiah, which we did last week, and that's obviously the Mussar approach to the altar. But the others, the Be'er Hetev and Mate Ephraim, cite the Ari that you should cry. And Rav Mazuz in his Parsha sheet last week takes it up as well, and he says they don't have to be in contradiction, or the way he reads it. He says you shouldn't cry, but if you can't help it and you cry, it's not such a terrible thing. But he advocates very strongly that no, that it's not. It's a happy day. Why is it a happy day? Because I'll read you something he says. He quotes the pasuk again. He says that we get a haircut before Rosh Hashanah. We dress nicely. We're mesameach. Why? Ki yodim shakadosh baruch hu rachum lachanu. Because we know that God is merciful, and therefore a lolav coat. But if you can't help it, it's okay. You can do it. So I guess it is machoka. So the Ari, I don't know what the Ari would do with the pasuk in Nehemiah, but okay. And Moshe, your other point, I'll get to next class, God willing. Okay, now we're moving in to the last of the yeshivas we're focusing on, and that's the Telz yeshiva. And we have someone who listens to us, I don't know, every week, but most weeks, Rabbi Dov Lokich, leading rabbi in Detroit. And he publishes often interesting things on Jewish history, full of scholarship and easy to read. And I encourage Rabbi Lokech to put them all together. He's published enough by far to have a hundreds and hundreds of page book. Here's the one he sent me, which I can send to anyone. If you could see it here, the Telz Yeshiva in Lithuania historical retrospective, always with great quotes, not great quotes, great pictures as well. And some of them he's mentioned our Torah in Motion trips that he's come along with us, like he did one on Gibraltar this summer. And so he has I mean, I could take it, there's other sources as well, but he does a great job summarizing about Telz before I get to the Mussar dispute, because Telz We should note that Telz in and of itself is significant in yeshiva. There's interesting things in the Telz yeshiva before we get into the great dispute. Now, Telz today, we have it in Cleveland and I guess in Riverdale and Chicago. But Telz was unique in for a couple reasons. And he tells the story at the beginning, Rabbi Lokech. One of the things that the Telz Rosh Yeshiva of Lazer Gordon, who, by the way, is buried in London because he was raising money and he was in London when he died, so you can see his grave there. He himself was not really anti-Mussar. He becomes Rav. First of all, he studied in Rishon Salanter's base medrash, and he becomes Rav in Kelm. So he knew Rav Simcha Zissel very well, but he was like a forward thinker. And tells they did the whole there was a whole movement there. They created a gymnasium, Hebrew, the Avna school system, which is like a modern Orthodox school system, was very much attached to Telz. The machina they had there was Ivrit. They taught they girls' education. It's really interesting what they did in Telz. It bears no resemblance whatsoever to the Telz yeshiva today. Yeah, but one of the things that Blazer Gordon advocated was creating a newspaper. And that was a big dispute. Today, of course, the Haredim are full of newspapers. The idea that this could be controversial, but of course, these things are always controversial when they first come up. I mean, we can remember, every single one of us here can remember when the internet was controversial. Now, even Agudas Yisrael has a website, and all the Haredim use the website and they use emails. But I can still remember when the internet was usser, Isser Gomor. And then it became obviously what they call Gezerah She'enat Tzibur Yachol Amod, that you can't buy airline tickets anymore without so it became a necessity, and so that's always how it works. And but he mentions Rabbi Lokech that Rabbi Reb Chaim didn't invite when his son got married, Ramosha Soloveitchik, he didn't invite Reblazer Gordon. He was so upset. That's the story. He was so upset with him for the newspaper that the idea that he should have a newspaper, which they did create newspapers, but Reblazer Gordon, the story is he came to the wedding anyway because he figured that, as he says, a good friend comes even if he's not invited. But Telz was a bit of a different sort of yeshiva, just to summarize what Rabbi Lokech has. And you can find it all in Rabbi Lokech, but you can also, if you want more detail, this amazing book by my favorite publisher, uh, Shaul Stamfer, The Lithuanian Yeshivas of the 19th Century. Now, this is a translation of his Hebrew volume, but this is better because it's more updated, and especially when it comes to Volozhin, it has the material from from the Russian archives as to why the Volozhin Yeshiva was closed. I think that's actually in the second edition of the Hebrew as well, but this is more updated. And he has a chapter on Telz. He has a chapter on Volozhin, a chapter on Slobodka, and a chapter on Telz. Well, first of all, as summarizing for my Lokech, they introduced different shearing of different levels. It used to be that you didn't have different shearing by, for less and lower and more advanced. We take this for granted today. It's standard in the yeshivas. You have a shear for the lower students, the medium, the more advanced, but Telz begins with this. Second of all, Telz starts with entrance exams, which is a new thing. You have an entrance exam that usually you come, as Rabbi Lokich says, and you'd speak with learning. In learning with the Rosh Yeshiva, and then he'd let you in or not. But now it tells you have a formal application, an acceptance prospect. You fill out a form, you get a letter telling you to come for a bachina on this day. You don't just show up. You have to bring a letter of recommendation. All very formalized. When you went home for the Zman, the vacation, you couldn't just come back. You would have to receive a letter from the Rosh Yeshiva, or the Yeshiva, I should say, telling you that you can come back, that you're allowed to come back. And Rabbi Lokich himself studied in Telz in America. And you mentioned, Rabbi Lokich, that you took a Jewish heritage trip years ago with Professor Lyman, and you saw the building of the Telz Yeshiva. I can tell you that building was actually bought by with money, I guess American money. It was bought and is now owned by people from the Telz group, at least descended from Sorotskin in Israel, who has connection to Telz. And I don't know if it's being used all the time as a shul or a yeshiva, but it's owned by Jews now, as are other buildings. I mean, the famous one, when I went to Lublin, it was like a pharmaceutical, not pharmaceutical, as a school, pharmacy. Now it's owned, not only is it owned by Jews, my son went there a few years ago, and they stay overnight. It's a Jewish hotel, a kosher hotel, and all the groups who go on, I don't know what they call it, when the yeshivas go. They don't call that March of the Living, but the yeshivas, they take them to Poland, and they go around, and they stay in Lublin. I didn't go because some yeshivas go in October or March. My son's yeshiva went in January, and that's I'm not so anxious to go to Poland in January. It's a little cold, so but there's other things I want to mention, and that's some points mentioned by Stamfer in his book. So, for instance, on he refers to the fact that he quotes, there's a memoir of Simcha Asaf. Simcha Asaf was Supreme Court Justice of the state of Israel. And he was also a Gaon, mamash a Gaon in learning. And he looked like a Rosh Hashiva too, if you see pictures of him. So he's a Telzer. He learned in Telz. By the way, Louis Ginsburg is a Telzer. In fact, if you look, I can show you. I have the materials, the Tells. In fact, the Tells society organization, Tells alumni in America, when they formed a whole group in the 30s to raise money for the yeshiva. They put Louis Ginsburg on the presidium, and in the stationery that goes out, he's listed there. Uh, One of the Rabbanim, I think it's Chaim Zimmerman, I think, has a whole attack on them. How can you place him on your presidium and take pride in that? He's working over at the seminary, but they did. They took pride. So Simcha Asaf writes a memoir of his time, and it's published in a book that um, contains all these different memoirs. I've shown it to you before. And he says, when he first arrived, he had to go to the yeshiva building to learn how to find a room. There's a special committee organized by the students called the lodging committee. No, the yeshiva had students in charge of a committee. And every student had to go to there. And then you had a price. And it was all done by the committee. And the committee kept a close watch to ensure that the landlords would treat the students with respect. The committee supervised the cost of the meals that the students ate at people's homes. And if you had complaints about the landlord, you would go to the committee. That's something that no other yeshiva had. Asaf continues. He says that, Asaf explains that this is because there were disputes between the students and the yeshiva. So the rabbi, the Rosh Yeshiva, decided it would be good for the students to have their own representatives. And not just for this, for representative for student life. There was a committee for student life, and he says that there was a committee of 11 with representatives from all 5 shiurim. And he says they came up sometimes with extreme demands. I don't know what the demands are. Maybe better food or more. Who knows? But is there any yeshiva today? I don't know. Well, we have a lot of people from the yeshiva world who listen. Are there any Haredi yeshivas today that have student committees? I mean, in the high schools, the modern Orthodox high schools, you have student government, which they give the students some money and let them feel like they're important. But it's just sort of like to build character. But do any of the yeshivas, the Haredi yeshivas, actually have student committees where they're involved in anything? I don't know. I haven't heard of anything. Now, what Stanford tells us on page 312 is that there already was limited Mussar in Telz. Already in 1885, because Eliezer Gordon himself was sympathetic to this. Um, well, he doesn't say that. I say he was sympathetic. Stemfer says, quoting someone else, that he wasn't so sympathetic. But knowing what I know about him and his connection to Rav Simcha Zissou, I think the evidence is he was sympathetic. But really, it was his son-in-law, Rav Yosef Leib Bloch, who was the real advocate of it. And so they brought in the, Mussar. There were students, he points out, that were opposed to it because they thought it was Bittul Torah, as they would say in Lithuania. So they came up with a compromise that Mussar study wouldn't be for everyone at once, and it wouldn't be compulsory. Okay, so that was a compromise. But by the time you get to the 1890s, and Mayor Bar-Ilan studied there actually for a time, it was a part of the curriculum. A minor part, he tells us, but he says that in Volozhin, they used to say that a page of Talmud is better than all this Musar. But at Telz, he says that every evening for a half hour, and you could choose your favorite book. Okay, so we see that it begins in limited form, but then things really get controversial, become a conflict. By the end of the 19th century, um, they want to institute Mussar on a higher level and really like all the other yeshivas in a formalized fashion. Now, how do we know what I'm going to tell you now? Well, first of all, we have Asaf and we have some other memoirs, but the best memoir, the most detailed memoir, is written by a Rav named Rav Yerucham Varhaftig. Rav Yerucham Varhaftig was a Rav in Poland, in Warsaw. He was able to get out because he was fortunate. He had a son named Zerach Varhaftig, an important Mizrahi figure who was in Kovno during the war. He was very close with Sugihara. We spoke about him in the Mir Yeshiva talks. If you go online, you can find Zerach Varhaftig in his 90s. He returns to Japan and he meets with people that he knew. But it's a very important family with important children in the Torah world, in the academic world. But he was able to get his father out. His father came to Jerusalem, and his remaining years in Jerusalem. But he was one of the Dayanim, the Rabbanim. Warsaw didn't have a chief rabbi like we think of in other places. It had different Rabbanim, and he was one of the Rabbanim in an area of Warsaw. And he was in Telz during this time, and he left a memoir, and he reveals also the people who were responsible. And wait till you see who was responsible for the machlokas. But this is what Rabbi Varhoftik says. First of all, okay, Rabbi Bloch persuaded his father-in-law, Razor Gordon, or Shimon Shkop, who was then there, to appoint a mashgiach. And they appointed a person who's known as a tzaddik. His name was Reb Leib Chasman. Reb Leib Chasman, there was in my town, West Orange, New Jersey, there was an elderly rabbi. His name was Herschel Cohen. And when he was a youngster, he was a Talmud, not in Telz, but somewhere else, Stuttgart. That's where, as I recall, where he was a Talmud of Reb Leib Chasman. So this is like a connection that Reb Leib Chasman, I knew someone who knew Reb Leib Chasman. It's like my grandfather used to tell us at my grandfather's graduation from high school. My grandfather was born in 1910, so I guess his graduation was like around 1917, 1918. A Civil War veteran spoke. And I remember thinking that, Civil War, 1865. So if the guy is born in 1845, so what is he? He's not even 90 years old then. So my grandfather thought it was ancient, but I knew my grandfather. My grandfather heard, knew people who were in the Civil War. So he describes how Reb Leib Chasman had a forthright personality, but carried out his duties in a high-handed manner. He rebuked the Talmidim for talking and learning during davening. Okay, I mean, you can see it during Chazaras Hashatz, or maybe Pesukah de Zimra, who knows, or Kriyas Torah. They're talking and learning. Well, look, there's worse things, I guess, but it's not appropriate. You're not supposed to do that. Rabbi Hassman is right, but the students wouldn't take too kindly for that, and they were very upset with that. He said, and what did he say to them? He said, Torah study time and davening time are separate. They're not supposed to be mixed in. Now is davening, so it's not time to learn. Uh, so they weren't too crazy about that. They also, it says, began to make regulations and decrees. So anyone who didn't come to the Mussar Shir would be punished, just as if he didn't come to the Gemara Shir. Okay, trouble now. Why is that? My Varhaftik tells us because Reb Chasman thought that the value of Mussar is just as important as Gemara. This isn't going to go over very well among the Bahrain, that's for sure. He was also very until he came there, the younger students didn't have to do Mussar, the lower level, and he said that they have to do it, and if they didn't, whoever doesn't partake in Mussar would have part of their stipend deducted. They got a stipend from the yeshiva. Uh, so and because of this, the Mussar adherents became the important people in the yeshiva. And so the students who were not Musarniks, they started complaining about the Mashgiach, Rabbi Chasman, and said that he was destroying Torah study there. So very interesting story. Now, so the students, of course, we have two descriptions of the students, one from our Varhaftig and another from Ben Sion Dinor. Ben Sion Dinor is a historian. He becomes irreligious. A number of these people, of course, at the yeshivas in those days become irreligious. But he's an important historian, was involved in Zionism, and he wrote an amazing memoir. So and he quotes from it, but that Stanford. So he quotes here from Varhoftik, who also discusses it. So the students wanted to they wanted to stop the Mussar demands, but the Rosh Hashiva refused to. So what did they do? This is on page 314. Stanford describes it. Stanford quotes from Varhoftik. You could see it. It's in the I think the Sefer is called Shalmei Yerucham. You can see the original on HebrewBooks.org. So when the students, and these are the big Lamdani for the most part. Remember, now the Mussar students, some of them might not have been big Lamdanim, but if they support Mussar and Rabbi Chasman, they're the ones who are being made the Chosheva students, the important students. But the ones who are now being pushed down, the big Lamdanim, they decide to hold secret meetings and disseminate propaganda among the students to spread a spirit of rebellion against them. And Rabbi Varhofik tells us that it wasn't long before they're the majority, and they decided to rebel openly. One night in Shavat of 1897, um, they stop learning, and they begin to argue about how Mussar, how it's destroyed Torah study. And conflict breaks out, Rabbi Varhofik tells us, between the Talmidim on each side. And the Mashgiach is trying to get them to stop, but they're not listening to the Mashgiach. Um, But Varhaftig continues by telling us um, that Rabbi Eliezer Gordon, tried to reprove the students, tried to rebuke them. He says that you're being led astray by Talmidim who they're not doing L'Shem Shemayim. And we're going to expel all these troublemakers. Unlike the Altar of Sabatka, Rabbi Eliezer Gordon says, I'm going to expel them for their own welfare and for the welfare of the yeshiva. And he mentions by name the 12 students who are to be expelled. But he's a politician, or Blazer Gordon. He realizes that he can't just expel them because these are just the leaders of the rebellion. But what about all the students who joined them? So he decides to meet them halfway, and he fires Rabbi Chasman, the Mashgiach. And he says that he acknowledges that Rabbi Chasman is not suitable. He even says, according to Rabbi Rarhaftig, that he acknowledges that he brought a disaster on the yeshiva, and he's going to have to leave the yeshiva because he didn't know properly how to bring Mussar into the yeshiva. That Rabbi Rarhaftig says that the Rabbi Eliezer Gordon says that he engaged in an authoritarian fashion, and he didn't try to, in a slow manner bring Mussar. He comes in and immediately tries to indoctrinate everyone in Mussar all at one time, and they revert to the fact that the first two students, two levels, the first two classes, 1 and 2, remember, there are 5, they're exempt from Mussar. Now, uh, the students go to Rabbi Eliezer Gordon and they ask for the students who've been expelled to be let back in. And Rabbi Eliezer Gordon also compromises, meets them halfway, cuts the decree in half, I guess you could say, and 6 are allowed back in, and 6 Telz students are still expelled. Uh, uh, okay, but it gets more interesting because this puts an end to the dispute for a while, but under the surface, it's still, things are still percolating. But things really begin again in 1905. 1905 is the revolutionary year, revolutionary fever. And here we see, and this is also a description, here's the descriptions from Asaf. that shortly before Hanukkah 1905, an open rebellion broke out among the students. They called it a hupka. Hundreds of students were learning, and all of a sudden they stopped with the learning. You could hear a pin drop. Silence reigned, he says, so absolute that one could hear the buzzing of a fly. Then they would start learning again for a few seconds and then stop. In other words, they're creating chaos. Um, then at the end of this, they start throwing the benches and stenders, and they leave the base medrash in complete disarray. Um, and this went on for months and months. This, by the way, was not because of Mussar. This was because it begins now. This other rebellion begins because the Rosh Yeshiva wanted to put uh, Rav Lazer Gordon had a son-in-law named Hershowitz, and he put him in the yeshiva. Now, today, it's hard to see this happening in the yeshivas. Yes, there's been disputes in Ponevezh between two sides, but at the Rosh Yeshiva, we already saw when the Netziv tried to put Reb Chaim Berlin in, the students revolted. They didn't think he was up to the job. And here, the Rosh Yeshiva puts in his son-in-law, and the students refuse to accept him. They want nothing to do. I mean, today the students, if they don't like the Rebbe, they'll leave the yeshiva. But so it became really, really bad. And Asaf continues by saying there was complete uproar. Lights were shattered, the benches were overturned, windows were broken, and the students ran off. We have another example of this, of people rebelling against it. There's even an example. This is described. There was a booby trap that with water and a jug, and one of the mashgichim who wasn't liked very much. This was on a Shabbos. He walked in, and the water came down on him and landed on him. That's the yeshiva. So, I mean, this is all part of what's going on in Telz. Anti-Mussar is part of it, but it's not, there's a lot more going on there about it. I mean, there always was this percolating, this opposition to Mussar, but then when you put in a Rebbe that they don't like, they see this just as another example of opposition to what the students want. Basically, the students thought it was their yeshiva, and they can't be told to do what they don't want to do, and they don't want to accept rebbeim that they don't like. And I don't know where the yeshiva students get this idea. It's not their yeshiva. They don't own the yeshiva. The yeshiva is owned by the family, or Lazer Gordon's family, and they allow them to come in. Now, it's interesting today, if you know the history, you know the Telz yeshiva had a huge machlokas. It went to secular court. You can just Google it, between who should run the yeshiva, who should own the yeshiva. The whole thing is a bit strange because the Telz yeshiva, like any other institution, is a nonprofit organization. No one owns it. You can say that certain people run it, but I hate to say it, that all these yeshivas that run as family trust, if they're nonprofit and they have boards, they're not owned by anyone. No one owns the Telz yeshiva. No one owns the Mir yeshiva in America. Or no one owns any of these yeshivas. Uh, they're not private institutions. They're public trusts, whether they like it or not. They run them like they're owned by their family, but legally they're not. So. This time, again, we're told that there's 12 students who were troublemakers. 8 were sent away. Um, some of them thought that they'd be able to come back, but no, they received a message, Lo Yavo, you're not returning, and they were known as the Lo Yavodniks. They were not returning. And so what did the yeshiva do? They requested from the Alter of Slobodka to send 30 or 40 Slobodka students to calm things down. So the veteran students, the ones who were at the yeshivas, of course, were furious that their compatriots had been expelled. They were even just as furious that Mussar students had been brought in here. And there were all sorts of terrible incidents. Yeshiva property was destroyed, things that you can't imagine yeshiva students doing it, but they demand that these are the old yeshiva students. They demand that the new students be expelled, the ones they brought in from Slobodka. They demand that the mashgiach, the Mussar mashgiach, be fired. They demanded he be fired. And when the yeshiva said, to get rid of compulsory Mussar study, or either reduce it or abolish it. And when the yeshiva didn't listen to that, the students called a strike. the yeshiva students, which is the overwhelming majority, I would think, called a strike to not go to the yeshiva, and the yeshiva is forced to shut down. So do the yeshiva students just sit at home, batul desman? No, they start learning at various shuls and other places. They create their own yeshiva separately from that. And they raised money. They got money from local people, from others, and this went on for a few months until the new mashgiach, his name was Rav Eliezer Luft, he leaves. I'm sure that he was pushed out, uh, and he took the Sabaka students with them, and learning began again. Look, at the end of the day, if you're a Rosh Yeshiva, you're only a Rosh Yeshiva if you have a yeshiva. If all the Talmidim leave, you could stick to your guns and say, "This, it's my way, it's my yeshiva." But if no students are there, you're not a Rosh Yeshiva. It's like if a tree falls in the woods, does anyone hear it? If a Rosh Yeshiva doesn't have a yeshiva, is he still a Rosh Yeshiva? There was no more Telz yeshiva, and I want to tell you who the leader of the two leaders of this rebellion was. The people who shut down the Telz yeshiva, opened up the competing, created a parallel yeshiva, a phantom yeshiva. And who were the two people? Okay, here's person number one. Um, Here's person number one. Yosef Shlomo Kahaneman. We know him as Rosh Yeshiva of the Ponevezh Yeshiva. And he has many zechuyos. The Israeli flag hangs every year on Yom Ha'atzmaut from the Ponevezh Yeshiva because he started it, and they won't change it. Now, he was the Telzer then, and he was the one. It says here in Wikipedia actually, who he nigba tells at Mered Hamusa, and he was the one who created the competing Telz Yeshiva. Now, as I said, we know him. He's after his youthful rebellion, he settles into more conventional yeshiva life, and he starts the Ponevezh Yeshiva, and I mean, he's in terms of building of Torah. Now, great, look, he's a Gaon, etc., but he's not remembered as a Gaon in learning. There's not the yeshivas. His shiurim are not. I mean, that's not what people remember him for. He's a builder. He built the Ponevezh Yeshiva, which I mean, some would say Mir is the most important, but others say Ponevezh is the most important yeshiva in the Haredi world in Israel, and so he gets a lot of credit. He would come to America, by the way, to raise money. He has a nephew, his brother's son, passed away recently. Nobel Prize winner, Daniel Kahneman. He spells it Kahneman. Um, Nobel Prize winner. I said Nobel. It's Nobel. That's how you pronounce it. Originally was in Israel, but it comes to America. One of our listeners, Yehuda from Philadelphia, he was reading how Rav Schechter in one of his books mentions how Reb Kahneman, I guess this would have been in his 60s. Let's see, he passes away late 60s. Rabbi Kahneman was in an assisted living center in Washington Heights. Now, so what's he doing there? Why recuperating or whatever? Why isn't he back in Israel? So Yehuda emailed this about 10 years ago, Daniel Kahneman, and asked him, "Do you know anything about this?" And he wrote back. He actually wrote back to him and said, "No, nothing. I didn't get the sense from that email that they had any connections. That I mean, Kahneman, I believe, was an atheist, anti-religious is probably, but these Litvaks, they have geniuses. If they don't become Gedolei Yisrael, they become great in other areas. And um, before I tell you a story about Rabbi Kahneman, let me tell you who the other leader of the rebellion was. And we're told this in the memoirs. If the memoirs didn't tell us about it and it was just word of mouth, I bet you today in the hagiographies, they would not mention Rabbi Kahneman because it doesn't look good. Although you should know that among all the Gedolim, Rav Kahneman has a book about him, a biography, which is not a hagiography, called Echad Bedoro. And it actually tells it like it is, which is unusual. It was published before hagiographies came into fashion. Here's the other person, head of the rebellion, Avraham Herzfeld. He was a leader, labor Zionist in the Histadrut, Chavar Knesset. Came from, of course, a rabbinical, Orthodox, it was rabbinical, I don't know, religious family, was in Telz. but completely irreligious later in life. It says here in the biography, he was actually husmacha rabbanut. So he actually received smicha. So, I mean, that's the situation of, that's the 20th century. Here you have people, iluyim. It's not like today where everyone goes to yeshiva. In those days, only the best and the brightest went to yeshiva. So he, together with Rabbi Kahaneman, opened up the competing Telz yeshiva. And then what happens? Well, what happens is, with the rebellion in 1905, people become seduced by socialism or Zionism, Bundism. These were idealists. These were people who were looking to change the world, to make the world a better place. And look, you have to give credit for the ones who stayed in the Orthodox society, but you can imagine how many people being told that your job in life is to remain here in this shtetl, somewhere in Poland or Russia, and that's where you're going to remain, and you'll become a Rav, and that's that. Compare that to people who want to create a new Jewish society where you can go and Jews will have freedoms. And they can live complete Jewish lives. They can work the land like Jews used to do, and they can feel self-respect and all that. Both Now, some people remained religious doing that. They rebelled against the rabbis and they remained religious. But others were told by the rabbis, if you actually do this, you might as well just reject Torah because this is not the Torah way. So for young people, 18, 19, 20, 21, faced with that, many of them said, well, if that's the choice, Torah and living this lifestyle, which is not at all appealing, versus this, everything will look so bright out there, a chance to change the world. Many of them did not withstand the temptations. And Avram Hertzfeld and Ben Zion Dinor, and you can go down the list of people like that who gave up Torah Judaism because they didn't, unfortunately, see that you can combine the two. Um, Now, Stamfer says on page 319 that most sources see the Mussar issue as really the cause of the student rebellion in 1905. But he points out that, you have the revolutionary mood in Russia, which is also a factor. And of course, I mentioned the appointing of a Rosh Yeshiva or a Rebbe that the students don't like is also going to be a factor. And he goes on. So at the end of the day, what happened is, though, that eventually peace would prevail by 1910. They kicked out some students, uh, with the revolutionary fever dying down by 1910, even Telz had accepted Mussar. And this era, which was about, figure 13 years of constant disputes, eventually a new era emerges with victory for the Mussar students. Now you think about it, think about the universities now. We're already into a year, coming up in a year. You have chaos and conflict on Harvard's campus, on Penn, on Columbia. This could go on for another 5 years or go on for another 10 years. I mean, how long did the 60s troubles go on for? So, I mean, it went on and off at different times. It peaked in 1897 and then again in 1904, 1905, 1906 again. I mean, that was the situation of Telz. But Telz is the last of the great yeshivas we're going to look at. When we meet next class, we'll just see Pat sums up a few other issues in Rodin and a couple other things, and then he gives his divrei sikum, his concluding, his judgment of how to evaluate everything we've been doing the last 15 weeks, the issue of Mussar and the feud, the dispute. So that's what we're going to see. But before we end today, a couple other things I want to tell you. Well, first, let me just say, because I think she's listened a couple sometimes, but she came one of the people who came on our trip this summer is the daughter of Rabbi Polyakov from Baltimore. Any Baltimore people might remember him, Menachem Mendel Polyakov. If you went to BMT or Grus, you'll remember his son, who was a Rebbe at BMT. But he wrote a book, right, Polikoff. He went to Telz from America. He went to Telz. You had people in America. They went to the European yeshivas. And he published a book called Minhagei Lita, Customs of Lithuanian Jewry. So he records in here a minhag of Telz that you might find interesting. He says as follows. And this is a theme, sort of a theme in the book, because today yeshivas follow the Mishnah Berurah, and he points out that in Europe, yeshivas had their own practices. They didn't need to follow the Mishnah Berurah. Look, we know that even in the Rod and Yeshiva, they didn't follow the Mishnah Berurah on certain things. So he says, despite the suggestion of the Mishnah Berurah to repeat the word zecher to accommodate the opinion that the reading is zecher, in the Telz Yeshiva and most other places in Lithuania, they did not repeat it. In fact, according to former Talmidim, they did not observe this custom even in Radin, where the Chavetz Chaim had his yeshiva. We know that they didn't wear the tzitzis out in Radin yeshiva, even though the Mishnah Berurah says to. My humble opinion is even if this repetition is permitted, it is certainly bad practice because it publicly introduces an element of doubt into the accuracy of the Masorah. Well, Rabbi Polyakov, you've lost that battle. There's no way in the world that Ashkenazim are going to go back to the old way of not repeating that. And despite Jordan Penkhauer, Yitzhak Penkhauer's article on the matter, this has now become a minhag, and you'd be lucky not to keep out other minhagim from coming in. But that's what he says. Now, also, I have this book by Mordechai Kirschbaum, an American Zionist Mizrahi figure. Rav Soloveitchik was very close to him. If you look at my letters in Chakira, I published letters of the Rav, I published in Chakira. A number of them are to Rabbi Mordechai Max Kirschbaum. So he has this book here, Mikol Malamdai Hiskalti, Ishim V'Sipureim. It's basically stories, things, experiences he had and things he heard. So he tells two stories about Rabbi Kahneman. Since we mentioned him, I'll share it with you. He was not an anti-Zionist, Rabbi Kahneman. He's an old-time Haredi type of Jew. He says that he came to Los Angeles the day after Rabbi Kahneman came to raise money. And he said Kahneman could be a bit of a joker. He says you have all these people coming to raise money, and he says to them, he goes, "You Jews are hypocrites." And he says, "Why do I call you this? Because when I was years ago, you know who they would call a hypocrite? In Poland and Lithuania, a hypocrite was someone who dressed Jewish. He looked Jewish on the outside, but on the inside, he wasn't really from." He says, "But here I come and I see you. You dressed all modern American, but really on the inside, you have strong Jewish feelings." So basically, like in quotes, like you're like hypocrites that. And then he says that Rabbi Kahneman insisted that someone was upset with him. He goes, well, "How come why should I give money to your yeshiva? Why don't you, you don't, in your yeshiva, your shiur is in Yiddish, not in Hebrew." And Rabbi Kahneman says, "I'm not against learning in Hebrew." He says, in fact, he says that I can't give a shiur in Hebrew because my Hebrew is not good enough. But if I could, I would. Oh, by the way, one more funny thing. This is very funny in this book. It On page 118, 117, 118. I don't know if it's a true story. It sounds apocryphal, but it says that when Rav Baruch Ber Leibovitz came to America to raise money, they would always come to New York, and they would have them meet with the mayor. They have like a ceremony. We even have a picture of Rav Kook and the Kovno Rav or Moshe Mordechai Epstein with the mayor. You can find it by Googling it. And they were introduced. The speaker at the event was a person named H.L. Gordon. He was a former student. Rabbi Yaakov Weinberg was friends with him. He was I think he was in Slobodka and Volozhin, and he was a psychiatrist and also Talmid Chacham. He used to write for Hador. So the mayor spoke, and in English, of course, welcoming Baruch Ber, and Gordon translated it into Yiddish. And as he's translating it, he threw in some words of Chazal and Rambam. And when he sat down, Baruch Ber said to him, he whispered to him, he says, "I know there's such thing as Chassidim Yomos Olam, but this is the first time I'm meeting, a Talmid Chacham of the Yomos Olam." And he says, when Baruch Ber got up and he gave his thing in response, thinking that the mayor understands Jewish stuff, Gordon translates it in quotes, and instead of quoting Chazal, he throws in Plato and Aristotle, and the mayor says to him, "I knew this rabbi knew Torah matters, but I didn't know he knew great philosophers." Okay, it sounds apocryphal. I don't know. Finally, one last thing. You know what? I'll say it for next class. We're talking about the revolutionary fever. What I want to share with you next class, I'll do it at the beginning, the man who we told you that the three greatest Machadshrim, the three greatest Rosh Yeshiva in the early 20th century are Vitzela Ponevezh, Rav Chaim Soloveitchik, and Rav Burstein, the Rav of Tavrik. And there was unanimity, it seems, that the greatest was Rav Vitzela. Rav Chaim himself says the greatest. You want to see how important the revolution, how significant the revolutionary fever is? I'm going to tell you what happened not only to Rav Itzela's family, but what happened to Rav Itzela himself. It will blow you away, but I think it's too late, so I don't have time for that. So let me quickly take the questions. And next class we'll probably get to the Chazon Ish also. Uh, okay, so someone said they emailed me documents about Torah Chesed. Okay, we'll see. Ruth says that the lamenter in Eicha is talking about accepting all the degradation of the conquest of the enemy as part of the punishment from Hashem. It's more at Tziduk Din than advice for everyday behavior. That's what I saw on, also, that's how they explain it on in the Das Mikra. Yes. And Frankel says the Girl Gymnasium and other infrastructure teachers academy also were introduced by Rav Bloch only after Rav Eliezer Gordon dies. Yes, that's true. And Rav Bloch also seemed to have certain quasi-Zionist sentiments. But Rav Eliezer Gordon shows about the newspaper that he's a forward thinker. Rav Eliezer Gordon, I saw Rav Bloch is really the one who sets up the Avna system, all these sorts of things. Um,
Yep.
There's Herb. I mentioned you. Herb, in your commentary to Matthew, you wrote, "Oh, thank you very much. I'm very glad you were with us. It's instructive to note that Matthew's language in 530 approximates the expression found in Lamentation 330, whereby one is to give one's cheek to the smiter, one is to be filled with insult. The parallel of cheeks insults drives home the point that Matthew's striking the cheek is an expression of insult rather than a physical damage." Okay, I didn't have in University of Scranton. We have your commentary, but I did not have it. Um, Here with me. Okay. And Rabbi Lokich says if anyone wants the article to contact him. And Elaine says that Simcha Asaf was your cousin on my father's side. That's good yichus. Franco, I think my version of Sanford's book doesn't include the later stuff, introducing various other organizations, innovations by Bloch. Yeah, he doesn't talk. He ends. I mean, he doesn't. I'll tell you when he ends his story. They end by World War One. They don't go after World War One in any of the yeshivas here. So you, if you want to get the later stuff, you need to. I don't even know if Katz discusses what I'm talking about, but you can see there's Ben Zion Kobansky has written about this, and he has a book and articles, and Mordechai Zalkin also has an article on this. There's good stuff on it.
May I tell
Uh,
you something about Rabbi um, um, Kavod? Sorry.
Write it down. We'll get back to you. Someone privately asked, was Laser Gordon a student of Resource Hunter? Yes, as I mentioned, I mentioned it afterwards. Elaine, what was the objection to Mussar? I have to say we've been doing it now. This is week 15, so I can't go into it now. Uh, um, Someone privately says the story goes that after Rav Kahneman gathered all the Telz students and opened the new yeshiva in a local shul, the group ran out of money. Rav Kahneman, who would one day be known as a formidable fundraiser, set about raising money in Telz for the breakaway group and even had the self-confidence to approach Rav Lazer Telzer for funds. And even more amazingly, Rav Lazer, hearing about starving yeshiva students, promptly contributed money. Yes, it is reported that not in the context of the yeshiva, at least I read, it's just that the students who were thrown out when they went to him for money, he gave them money. But that's the same story, correct. David says that all the local modern Orthodox schools in my community, Beit Shemesh, do not read Zecher Zecher, and you believe this is the case throughout Israel. How is this possible, David? The unanimous minhag of the Ashkenazic world by the 60s, are you saying it was never the minhag, or somehow Penkhauer's been able, I know that in his own shul, he got people to change. It's hard to imagine that um, or maybe I just know what happened in America, but in Israel, it never really took off the way it did in Israel, anyway, it did in America. Someone says privately, my Rebbe met Rav Kahneman, who was staying in his home as fundraising. He asked my Rebbe, who was 6 or 7, what does it mean in English? I'll try my best. My Rebbe tried explaining it to him, and Rav Kahneman interrupted him and said, Es mein Gornish for Gornish. Okay. Uh, Oh, David, you're saying Rabbi Breuer's article. Okay, before Penkower, Rabbi Mordechai Breuer wrote a piece. It's called Mikros. I can send anyone a PDF. Sheslam, psukim that basically we have established the truth, and he shows that there is no real reason to repeat it. That the evidence, first of all, the evidence of the Gra is questionable, and there's no suffix. And no one repeated this really. This was a tiny minhag. No, they never did it in Poland. The Hasidim never did it. Most Litvaks never did it. The Mishnah Berurah says to do it. So as the Mishnah Berurah became more popular, this then took on a life of its own. Um, so I guess from what you're saying, David, is that in the religious Zionist world, Breuer's article had created a situation that shuls that did it stop doing it. Okay, you're saying that very, very interesting. Now, among Hasidim, as far as I know, we have Hasidim who listen to us. Hasidim adopted this practice also. And this was never the Hasidim. Sfardim, of course, don't do this. And it wouldn't make any sense because Sfardim, there is no Zecher. Sfardim pronounce a segel like a Seirei. So there is no difference. And in the Breuer's community, they never did it. And I assume Breuer's today does not repeat it because Breuer's at least is supposed to keep to all the old minhag. Um, Finally, Gershon, do you remember what you were going to say?
Yes, yes. I want to say Rabbi Kirschblum was a frequent guest in our house in Golders Green at the same time as Rabbi Fishman, who was one of the signers of the Declaration. He was a
Yes, Yehuda Leib Fishman.
he was a very active member of Mizrahi, and he particularly impressed my mother because he wrote her long letters of thank you. We've never seen anything like that, using long words, which, because she came from Germany, she was not familiar with.
Ah, very interesting. He's a REITs graduate, Musmach of Yeshivas Ravitz Elchanan, a leading Mizrahi figure. He was rabbi in Scranton for a while, believe it or not. And then they appointed him to head the Mizrahi in America, and he was one of the early aliyahs from American religious Zionists, and was worked for the government in Israel in Torah education. Thank you very much for that, Gershon. Rabbi Kelman, I wish everyone that just
What
want to
is
wish you all
what
that we
is
should all be
what is
sealed
what is Zecher?
for
What
life.
is Zecher? What
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 is
is
what?
Zecher? I didn't understand what you were talking about.
Was
Zecher.
in Parshas Zachor, in Parshas Kitetse, there's a commandment to read Parshas Zachor. Remember what Amalek did. So when the practice is when we read it, not when we read the Parsha Kitetse, when we read it before Purim, we repeat either the word, Chabad does the word, or we repeat just the phrase, Timche es Zecher, Timche es Zecher. That's what I was taught to do. That's what Ramosha says to do. But some people repeat the whole pasuk because the question is it Zecher with a Seirei under the Zion or Zecher? And since this is a Torah obligation, we want to be sure we read it correctly. So the practice developed based on some report that apparently the Vilna Gaon might have repeated this twice, to repeat the word or the verse twice. And that's the standard practice among Ashkenazim in America and Europe, as far as I know, that they repeat Zecher, Zecher. Uh, I just want to wish everyone, not and people in America, in Europe, and especially those in Israel who are entering a new situation, that we should all be sealed for good in the book of life. And but we will pick up, God willing, next Monday because there's no Chag next Monday. And Rabbi Kelman.
Do you know the story that I heard of Rav Kahneman, who is, as you know, a fantastic fundraiser? True that somebody rich, non-observant Jew said, "I'll give you a lot of money, but I don't want the people to wear hats." And he took the money and he built a girls' school. Do you know if there's any truth to that story?
No, it would be hard to imagine because in those days,
I,
wearing hats are not like today.
I
People
think
wear
I meant
hats
the
all,
keeper. I don't
yeah.
think he meant. I mean, they didn't want anything. I imagine
Yeah.
it's a apocryphal, but I just heard that story about
Now,
one
I'll
of
tell
the.
you a story which is not apocryphal because I heard it from from one of the daughters of of Kushner, Joseph Kushner, the great builder, the the grandfather of Jared. That when Rabbi Teitz was, this is what she told me again. Rabbi Teitz was raising money in Elizabeth. He wanted the money for a mikvah. And these families, the builders, by the way, were not really Orthodox. They came from traditional backgrounds, but they were not Shomer Shabbos, and they became more religious as Rabbi Teitz had an influence on them. He said that he wanted to build a swimming pool, and he got the money and he used that to build the mikvah. That's what she told me 100%. Now, is that possible? Could Rabbi Teitz have actually said to someone, and anyone from Europe knows what a mikvah is? I mean, could he have really said to him, "I bring really a pool"? Maybe he spoke in equivocal language. I can imagine Rabbi Teitz saying, I want to build a place like a big place to where women can go in and cool off." But to say, I can't. It would be hard to imagine he actually said a swimming pool. But maybe he said a pool, build a pool. A mikvah is a pool. It has to be a pool. If it's not a pool, it's not kosher. So I don't know. I don't know that story of Rabbi Kahneman. I haven't heard that one. Yeah.
And by the way,
Uh,
Daniel Kahan's book, and he just passed away a few months ago. It's fantastic. Thinking fast and slow. I think what it's called. It's really, I think it's a fantastic book. He's like the father of. So I won a Nobel Prize of behavioral economics. Anyways, that's just
Jay. I
like.
heard that story about tefillin.
What about tefillin?
You can have the money if you build a place that students will not wear tefillin.
Oh, the students when we're tefillin, and he
that
took
makes
the
more
right.
sense.
So okay, right. So there are all these various stories, but apparently he was a great fundraiser. I mean, did you ever meet him, Rev Kahneman? I mean, no, did anybody
No,
ever
he
meet him?
visited Detroit before my time, many times.
He died in 69, I think. Yeah.
I was going to ask when he passed away. I don't know exactly when, but
Yeah,
okay.
69. So it's before our
Okay,
time.
I
And
mean, it's long ago, but not like ancient history.
yeah,
But
people know, I'm sure. Yeah.
you know. I
Uh,
know Rabbi Wein writes about it. He used to stay at Rabbi Wein's house, I think, when Rabbi Wein was rabbi in Florida. But anyways, okay.
okay.
Tomorrow, Rabbi Schulman will be giving his class on finishing up on Rosh Hashanah. Please, God, I will be giving my class on the Mussar Wednesday morning. You have to send that an email, 9 a.m., 9 a.m. Wednesday. Our normal Friday class will do Wednesday morning, Erev Rosh Hashanah. If those who can make it, great. Not, okay. And then, of course, on Sunday, we'll have our Yom Kippur, Yom Ayun. I just put the link in if you haven't registered yet. 7 speakers. Really should be a very nice program. 9:15 till 2:15 on Sunday. It's some Gedalia, so it's not like you're going out for lunch or anything. But anyways, and so I don't see or speak to you, should like echo Mark's words, should be a year of peace and Besurot Tovot and good things for the Jewish people worldwide. Okay, everybody, Laila Tov.
Amen. Laila Tov.
Thank you very much, Lila.
Thank you.